You've probably watched reviews of rods that talk about sensitivity, but those just focus on the components the rod is made of. I'm going to do a real-world test today to really determine how sensitive some rods are. Stay tuned. I'm out on the beach here in Wilmington, North Carolina today to do as scientific a test of rod sensitivity as I could come up with. This is actually my second shot at this. I spent a number of hours yesterday doing a very complex thing that I concluded wasn't really understandable. So today, what I'm going to do to test sensitivity, and in my definition, what I want to do is mimic the very light bite of a fish as you move your bait across the bottom. So how do you do that? How do you put just that much tension on the rod to see if the tip will bend and indicate that you have a light bite? So what I'm going to do today is I've got a small egg sinker and I've got a measuring cup. And what I'm going to do is maybe I'll start out with a half cup of sand. I'll pour that on top of this egg sinker, and that should mimic a very light bite. And we'll see how much sand, maybe it needs a cup, maybe more, to get that rod tip to bend. And the less sand I have, that means the rod tip is that much more sensitive. So what I'm going to do is I've got a base case here, and then I've got these T-Zac rods that I just got. They're mid-priced, and really my motivation for this is to decide whether the money spent on these was worth it over the inexpensive base case rod that I'm going to use. So why T-Zac? Well, you probably have a rod made by them right now, except it has a different brand name on it. It turns out that they've been in the rod manufacturing business as an OEM manufacturer for the last 20 years. So the difference between this rod, which is branded with T-Zac, and yours is really just the brand name. And so what I want to do, obviously, is get the best rod for the least amount of money. And so why pay a premium for a brand name when I can go right to the source? Well, let's get on with the test. This is the base case with a quarter cup of sand on top of it. My viewing angle was a lot better than what the camera shows, but you can get a sense by looking at the shadow. This is the same thing, 1/8 of a cup. Here's the T-Zac Classic with a quarter cup of sand on top of it. I'm trying to pour the sand the same way every time. You know, part of this is feel. And as I put pressure on this weight, I can feel it before the rod tip starts to bend. I hate to be subjective like that, but that's kind of the way it is. Again, check the shadow. You can see the rod deflect, and even on the 1/8 cup, there's just a little bit of deflection here. T-Zac Supreme, quarter cup of sand on top. I can start feeling it right there just as I put a little bit of pressure on. And look at the bend. I'm getting a lot more bend in the rod tip than I was on the others. Look at that. It was not as noticeable with 1/8 of a cup, but it was still better than the other two rods. That's about as scientific of a test as I can get without having real measuring instruments. And even though it may not have been exactly a quarter or 1/8, you know, it was my eye and I was trying to make it the same every time. And what isn't shown in that test is what I was feeling at the end of the rod. And I can assure you that the sensitivity went up dramatically between the base case rod right here and that T-Zac Supreme. I could really feel more of the resistance even at the 1/8 of a cup on the T-Zac Supreme, a little bit less on the Classic and a lot less on the base case. So a lot of this ends up being, you know, what you can feel in your hand. And based on this test, I think I'm comfortable to conclude that the money was well spent moving from the inexpensive base case to the TZAC mid-price rods. You guys have any comments on how this test was done? You have a better way to measure sensitivity that, you know, isn't subjective? Granted, you know, what I felt is subjective, but what I could see with that rod tip movement was empirical. That was what was happening on the ground. Comments? Throw them down below. Thanks.